Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining today. We are going to be looking at the question, how affordable can a top-ranked MBA be? So attending a top-ranked MBA program can be a significant financial investment, but at the end of the day, what counts is the return on investment. And candidates choose to pursue an MBA for a variety of reasons: career growth, career switch, help in setting up an entrepreneurial venture, personal development, networking, or even changing their geographical location. And with scholarships, a strong worldwide ranking, and one of the best ROIs, today we take a look at how EDHEC Global MBA is able to offer a top-class program with affordable tuition fees. My name is Nikki Harrell. I'm an international recruitment manager for the EDHEC Global MBA, and I'm joined today by Sandra Richez, the Global MBA Director, EDHEC MBA alumnus Aidan Johnson, CEO of OneCart in South Africa, and Nancy Bompaka in the Admissions and Financial Aid Manager. And we'll all explain how this is possible. So Sandra, we're looking at this question: can a top-ranked MBA program be affordable? So let's start with the notion of top-ranked. What does that actually mean? What contributes to making an MBA program top-ranked?
Thanks for the question, Nikki, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm dialing in from Nice, which you see behind me. So when we talk about top-ranked MBAs, there are really two elements that get involved. The first would be the rankings. Of course, there are three main rankings in the world that are, I would say, global rankings. If you're looking at on a global scale, the first is the Financial Times or FT ranking, which ranks 100 top schools in the world. Then there is QS, which ranks schools all over the world as well. And that's a worldwide ranking. And the third would be Bloomberg, which is a ranking that has regional rankings. So it'll have a Europe, an Asia, a North America ranking, for example. So those are the three big ones. They're different. So they use different criteria. They have different data sets. They come out at different periods in the year. So I think if you're looking for an MBA and you're looking to say, I'm looking for a top MBA, you really should consult the three rankings and really compare the three and pull out some information from all of them. So to give you an example, the FT will rank schools by surveying alumni 3 years after finishing their studies, and they'll base the ranking mainly on alumni salary data, and then some research ranks and then some school data. Bloomberg looks at 1 to 5 year out alumni and students and school data. And then QS actually doesn't look at alumni, student, or employer surveys. They mainly look at data, publicly available data for their rankings. So they're all looking at different things. So good to think about all three. I think if you ask any MBA program in the world, the one that really matters, the one that has everybody, gets everyone's attention, is the Financial Times ranking. And that's sort of like, the FTSE, list of schools. So really, it's hard to qualify for that ranking. And of those who qualify, they only publish the top 100 schools. So that is kind of the ranking of reference, I would say, on a worldwide basis. So there are about 5,000 MBAs in this world, if not more. Of those, some of them are ranked and accredited. But for example, this year, only 132 were eligible for the Financial Times ranking. And then they listed the 100 top ones out of that list. So I would say that one is probably the most selective. So I think when you're looking at schools, you need to look at the criteria, not just the ranking. So it's a great way for you to get a short list to say which MBAs are the ones I want to apply to. But when you're looking at a top-ranked MBA, they all sort of can be very similar. So what makes the difference? And this is where I suggest you dive into the criteria of each of these rankings. So if you take the FT, for example, there's a heavy weight on salary and salary change, about 32% of the ranking. But then there's about 20% of the ranking that's based on careers data, like career progress, career services. Then about 17% of the data is based on diversity and inclusion data. So how many women in faculty, how many women students, how many international students, etc. So those are kind of interesting things to know about the FT criteria. And all of the rankings will publish their methodology and criteria, so you can go into it. And I'd suggest you make a kind of table and see where the different schools stand out on the different criteria. Because in fact, no school is number one everywhere. It really depends, and schools are different, and that shows up as you go through the different criteria that they're ranking. So that'll give you an idea of how to use the rankings. So I think if a school is in the ranking, it's a quality program. After that, it's up to you to decide which criteria make it a quality program for you and for your goals. And you should be able to identify differences among the different MBAs thanks to these rankings. So, this is where I think rankings are really an interesting criteria to look at when you're searching for your MBA. I hope that answers the question, Nikki.
Thank you. So these are the rankings, but accreditations are something different then?
Yeah, very different. So where the rankings are sort of public competitive comparisons among schools based on criterion measurements and data samples. Accreditations are more like a quality process. So much like ISO norms or IFRS norms in accounting, we have accreditations in the business school world and in the educational world. There are really 4 main accreditations that you should look for in schools. The 3 main global accrediting bodies are AACSB in the US, EQUIS here in Europe, AMBA based in the UK. And then I would say, importantly, you should look at the national or regional accreditation of your school. Does your local or regional government recognize the degree being granted by that school? And that would be the 4th accreditation I would look for. Very few schools on the planet have all 4 of these. So that's going to be something you might want to check when you're looking into the accreditations. And it's a pretty good sign. These are like audit processes and continuous improvement processes. So for us, every 5 years, we have to reapply for accreditation in all of these different institutions, and we need to deal with audits regularly, and we need to show progress towards our goal and towards improvement of the MBA. So it really ensures that you have a quality program that meets the standards for education at a national, regional, and then international level. So I think that that's something you could look at. When it comes to national and regional accreditation, that's going to be important for work permits, for visas and things like this. So I think that's one that's particularly important.
Aidan, I know you did a lot of research before choosing the right MBA. So were rankings important to you?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the first questions that I asked myself was, is this a school that is globally recognized, top ranked, and is this a school and a program that's going to be able to set me up at a sort of a multinational, globally or locally? So more than anything else, it was one of the first sort of guardrails that I put up, essentially to rule out a lot of other schools and hone in on some of those top ranked, really high reputational schools. And of course, there are many other considerations, and I'm sure we'll unpack some of them today. But one of the very first ones we should ask after what Sandra suggested, which is kind of what's important to me, is how do these schools stack up, especially if it's to kind of cast off all of those that don't make the cut, and then to hone in on some of the finalists where it becomes more important to decide exactly what it is that you want out of the program.
Well, before we look at some of the other factors, can you maybe tell us a bit more about yourself and then perhaps detail your career story after the EDHEC Global MBA?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I'm from South Africa. I'm a South African. I grew up here. I live in Cape Town now as well, actually. I studied business management and economics here locally, actually in a partner school of EDHEC called Stellenbosch University. So I studied business management as my undergrad there. I then went into the corporate sector, working in sort of strategy, marketing, and some of consulting across insurance, telco, FMCG, at a couple of big corporates, PepsiCo, Harley-Davidson, a couple of organizations like that. I then came across, after, of course, going through this process that we're discussing today, to EDHEC and completed my program there, after which I was asked by a large African retailer called ShopRite to build and run a a grocery delivery service for them. And today I find myself running a Walmart-owned technology company called OneCart here in Cape Town as well.
Fantastic. It's a great success story. So tell me, how did you end up choosing EDHEC?
So I started by really trying to get down to what it was that I wanted out of this program, which whenever I speak to candidates, that's the first question that I really suggest that they try to get to the bottom of. It's a difficult question. It's much easier post-MBA than pre-MBA, but it's really important to try and understand, what is it that I'm hoping to get out of this? There are many answers, by the way, but if you can try and get to that question, it really helps you focus in on the ones that do deliver on those things. So for me, rankings, as I mentioned, was really important, but there were other really, really important factors. I wanted to do an MBA in a place that was incredible. So Nice obviously came to the top of the list. I wanted to do a program that was short and concise, and EDHEC Global MBA does that. I was very interested in the class demographic and profile. I was looking for a smaller class, very diverse, with very broad and varied opinions. And, when I looked at the class profiles across different schools, EDHEC really, really stood up in that sense. It was important to me to learn from the other class members. The faculty was another area that was important to me. I knew that I wanted to move into an executive role, and I knew that I was short on management accounting, for example, and I knew that a very, very prolific finance faculty. So all of these kind of factored in. But as soon as I was able to think about what I wanted next, that really helped to crystallize, which schools were and were not in that consideration set. And EDHEC obviously was right at the top.
So for you, EDHEC was both well-ranked and affordable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and just to echo what Sandra says, you can get quite formulaic in the rankings and the reputation, but I think it's a little bit more than that. For me, it's kind of stability, prowess, reputation. It's one thing to be highly ranked, but to be highly ranked within a very, very prolific French education system is incredible. And then, of course, affordability. For anyone coming into an MBA and looking to fund it themselves or with some of the support infrastructure, affordability is a big, big, big deal. And especially on soft South African currency, I was looking for something that was top ranked, highly regarded, but also something that was affordable at a base level, but also affordable in terms of what kind of offerings and support I could get from EDHEC along the way, which I suspect we might unpack a little bit further.
Sandra, Aidan just mentioned that he was looking for a good MBA, and that's something that we often hear from when candidates approach the admissions team. Do you think there's a difference between choosing a top-ranked MBA and the right MBA for you?
I don't really see those as opposing forces. So, obviously you can find a good MBA that's affordable. I think traditionally the MBA comes historically from the American market. These are 2-year MBAs and very highly priced, so an MBA can seem inaccessible to someone who's looking to spend less on their education, who has less to spend on their education. And this is where I think European MBAs have really positioned themselves well, because in Europe in general, in continental Europe, I won't speak to the UK, but in continental Europe, education is considered something that should be accessible to a greater number of people. And I think that France in particular is really strong in that field of return on investment. And EDHEC in specifically, I think we have just consistently been ranked over the years as having one of the best returns on investment. So, and the fact that we've been consistently also among the ranked and top MBAs and among the very few who have all 4 accreditations I talked about, is pretty much evidence that yes, you can be a good MBA, a ranked MBA, and an affordable MBA. And I'd say that's almost our strategy in a nutshell. We really believe strongly in diversity and inclusion. And part of that is making education accessible to anyone from emerging markets to US markets, to different socioeconomic categories. And even, to that point, we have introduced generous scholarships as well for women, understanding that women over the world earn less than men. And so why should they be paying the same price for an MBA? So those are some of the things that we think about and take into account. We have intercultural diversity scholarships, gender diversity scholarships, and of course, we have merit scholarships for people from all over the world. So we're really trying to make that MBA more accessible and still be a well-ranked MBA. But when your question also touched the point about the right MBA and a good MBA, which is sort of that's sort of a value judgment. I think that's different for different people. So I love what you said, Aidan. I think that's so true. First of all, what are you looking for in an MBA? What are your what's on your checklist? What are your must-haves and what are your nice-to-haves? And often we find the must-haves students are looking at things like, do I want an MBA that's abroad in an international context where I'd be out of my comfort zone, maybe learn a new language, get experience living abroad? Do I want my MBA to be affordable? How much do I have to invest in my education? Can I even afford an MBA? So those are good questions to be asking yourself. And those are some of the things that make an MBA right for you. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's also, do you expect strong career services and a lot of guidance? Are you looking for a large program or a small program? A large program has some clout when it comes to employment. A small program might give you more personalization in the support and follow-up that you can have with career services. If you're an entrepreneur, does that MBA offer you options for entrepreneurs? Do they have incubators? Do they have alumni or VC funding linked to the school? These are kinds of things that we see, being linked to Station F in Paris, one of the biggest incubators in the world, has really made a difference and attracts entrepreneurs to us, for example, here at EDHEC, in addition to our entrepreneurial specialization. So I think those are things, do you want a personalized experience? Do you want a larger school experience? Do you want to be in a capital city, or are you interested in being a more regional city, for example? Those are interesting questions to ask yourself. You could also say, what kind of learning do I like? Do I like applied learning? Would I like to keep in touch with business while I'm studying? Or am I looking for a more academic experience where I'll be, doing sort of more case studies and based on professor research and this kind of thing? So those are all things I think you should think about. Right now, I'd say look at schools as well. What could be right for you? Are you looking for knowledge on trending topics like diversity and inclusion, AI, digital innovation, entrepreneurship, leadership, these kinds of things? ESG, you might mention. I think sustainability and climate are huge issues for tomorrow's business, today's business. And maybe that's important to you when you're looking for a school. So I think first connect with your values, connect with the school's values, and then look at what your goals are. And then you should be able to find the school that is the right fit for you. And I think that fit is the right school. It shouldn't just be, that school's number 5, I should go there. Well, maybe that's not the right fit for you. Think about it.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks. So Nancy, we've talked a lot about rankings, but we haven't actually mentioned any ways a candidate can bring the cost of the MBA down or finance their studies. So you represent EDHEC's Financial Aid Office, and I'd like to know what advice you can give candidates today to make an MBA more affordable.
So it's true that furthering your education, especially with an MBA, can represent quite an investment at different levels. So my number one advice would be to plan ahead. So you can really assess, your financial situation. As Sandra mentioned earlier, can I afford an MBA? But also it will give you the time to do some research and gather, a maximum of information, find out what options exist, in terms of MBAs, but also in terms of funding. Check your eligibility, but also be aware of the different deadlines. So when it comes to affordability and funding, I would say that there are different mechanisms that exist that candidates can benefit from, such as scholarships and fellowships. Usually, they are offered by the schools and they're based on merit, on financial need, on diversity, or even, career goals. So it's important to really do your research early on. But there are also external funding options. So outside of the school, grants, loans, it can be public loans, from, the government, for instance, or, private loans through banks or through, other agencies. Government initiatives. Just to give you a few examples, there's FAFSA in the US, or GIBL for US veterans. There is Student Aid BC for British Columbia in Canada, and OSAP also for Ontario. There are the different Futuro programs in Latin America, so Col Futuro, Guate Futuro, Hondo Futuro, in different Latin American countries, where they offer scholarship loans. So a part of the funds you will receive will be considered a scholarship that you won't have to repay, and then another part of the funds will be considered loans, and then there are certain requirements. For instance, so because it's a government initiative, the whole idea is to help you develop the country, or benefit the development of the country. So you may be required to go back to your home country after a few years. So that's the whole idea of this kind of initiatives. But more generally, there are also options such as prodigy finance or Lendwise, that offer loans for tuition fees or even living expenses. Another option could be, employer sponsorship. Some companies, they're willing to support their employees in their education, so they can pay all or part of the tuition fees. And there again, in this type of arrangement, the idea is that the employee is expected to return to their company, after completing their education. But usually, the return with, higher responsibilities, a different position, a higher salary. So, yeah. But in terms of things I would say also to take into considerations, the type of program. Are you interested in a full-time program or in a part-time program? Because this can really make a difference in terms of expenses. If you do a full-time program, that means, apart from the tuition fees, you also need to consider, living expenses. If you do a part-time program, for instance, you'll get, the opportunity to continue working while you are, earning your degree. So it's a different kind of expenses that can be, involved. But it's important, whether you do a full-time program or a part-time program, to save as early as early on as you can, and also to start budgeting. So you have, the full picture of the costs that are involved. And Sandra was talking about comparing. So you can compare, programs, but also comparing, what they include in terms of fees, in terms of costs, in terms of everything. So, so definitely, as we said, attending or applying, for an MBA program can be expensive. It is true, but there are different, options, different tips, different strategies that, that help you make it more affordable, I believe. So it's very important, and I really would like to emphasize on it, to do some research early on, to don't wait, until the last minute, but really to be aware of what's available, and to plan ahead.
Thanks. I'd like to add something, if I may, Nikki. Do you have a second? Yeah. Sure. I mean, I think when you look at an MBA, it's a business degree, and so I think you have to, you do need to say, okay, this is a business proposal. I'm going to get studies. I'm going to leave my, at least in the case of a full-time MBA, I have to calculate that time away from earning salary. Because I'll be taking the training for a short period of time. So there's an opportunity cost to taking a full-time MBA. So you need to factor that in. And I also think, this whole idea of planning and looking at what the different schools can offer, what will be the range of what this MBA will cost me overall? And Nancy can help you, and our recruitment managers help students with that. But I also think, you also said, Nancy, something important. You can plan ahead for this, start saving. So the other thing that's possible is to, and I think it's a great idea, is to apply for an MBA for admission in a year's time or 2 years' time. You can actually enter the MBA, know that you've been accepted and admitted, and then take time to save the money up to be able to join. So I think that those are all really interesting ways that make MBAs affordable. And in any case, we're able to work with you to find a funding plan for financing your education. One thing we know is that it's a great investment the return is within 3 years in the case of EDHEC, and you'll have a salary boost of anywhere between 50 and 80% after, straight after your studies. That's hard to achieve out in the working world. So yes, you put money in, but I think that you also get a very good return. There are few investments today that allow that kind of return. So I'd say it's a great decision.
Good point. Let's come back to one of the things that Nancy mentioned at the beginning when she talked about scholarships, because EDHEC's scholarship policy is particularly transparent. And we will come back to that, both Sandra and Nancy, for more details on EDHEC's scholarship policy. But I'd just like to ask Aidan what your experience was on scholarships when you did your research on other programs.
Yeah, so there were two factors really that set EDHEC apart from many of its counterparts when it came to kind of scholarships and support. So already keep in mind that we're working off a base that is more competitive, in my opinion, than all of the schools that were in that bracket for me. So already I was on that base. But then I did notice that, in several of the other schools, the discussion around scholarships or support was quite murky. It was quite difficult to kind of weed through all of these kind of areas and applications, and it's quite overwhelming, not to know what kind of questions to ask and in what scenarios might I be eligible, etc. So I found it quite overwhelming in some of the schools. But what was really refreshing with EDHEC was, I guess, these two factors. The one being just like the simplicity. It was a case of, okay, so this is how some of the scholarships work. But in your case in particular, Aidan, you're from this country, you're of this gender, you need to get this score you're likely to get. And if you apply early enough, you're liable to have about this much support. Great. And that's going to bring your total cost down to this. And that was really simple for me to calculate in a way that a lot of the other schools, it was not so simple. So that kind of simplicity and transparency made it a lot easier to do what Sandra was talking about, like really just on the back of an envelope work out, what is this going to cost me? So that really helped. And the second factor that was really beneficial was that the scholarship proposition from EDHEC was very accessible. So in a bunch of the other schools, I found that I wasn't able to access some of these tiers or some of these offerings because either the school was highly focused in a specific discipline and I wasn't eligible in that discipline, etc., or there was just a giant size of class, in which case I was less competitive than some of these other students just because of the kind of scale of the people we're talking about. So those together in tandem made it quite easy for me in a couple of minutes to know, A, this is an already an affordable program, B, I can access a lot of the support, and C, in a couple of minutes, I have a really good idea of what I'm in for. And together, that made me feel, I think, a lot more comfortable with the proposition of taking on this quite scary exercise, which is taking on an MBA.
So very transparent for you then. But Sandra, how was the EDHEC policy devised, and what purpose does our scholarship policy have?
Yeah, well, I alluded to it before, so it's about how do you make MBA educations available to more people in the world, understanding that our pool of candidates come from every different background and every different country or location in the world. And currencies go through fluctuations like Aidan talked about before. So, the idea is to allow students to make a good financial decision. We take great responsibility in saying that if you're admitted to the MBA, we're going to make sure that you're able to graduate from the MBA, and that includes being able to pay the tuition fees. So we take a lot of pride in our ROI, or our value for money ranks. We like to think that we make our MBA accessible to more candidates by keeping tuition fees quite low, but also offering generous scholarships, and then helping our students come up with funding plans, whether that means through offering early admission or like Aidan was talking to, offering different and very clear types of scholarships. So our scholarships are completely guaranteed up until January 31st at this stage. So when you apply early for the MBA, you simply go to the website. You can actually see how much your MBA will cost you. And I think EDHEC is probably the only school today that does that. And we're quite proud of that. Then, so obviously, it's how the saying goes, right? The early bird gets the worm. So if you apply early, you have a guaranteed scholarship at EDHEC. If after January 31st you apply, it's the same scholarship. So again, quite transparent. There's nothing hidden there. So you can see what kind of scholarships you can apply for after January 31st. However, at that point, we use whatever funding is left over after January 31st. So it will be the same scholarships, but probably not the same amount. So you might, instead of getting a 40% scholarship, you might get a 30 or 20% scholarship, depending on how many funds are left. And so as you move forward towards the deadline, obviously you have less and less chance to get some of those scholarships. So that's important to know. And that's part of our selection process, and we try to keep it as transparent as possible. And then, from there, I think it's really about, being able to offer strong candidates incentives to complete their MBA. And then flexibility to say, okay, maybe this year it's not going to work out, but we can defer you to the following year or the year after that.
Thanks. Nancy, maybe this is a good time to run through the EDHEC scholarships.
Sure. So our scholarship policy really reflects, the different type of values that we're trying to promote as a school. So we really encourage gender and cultural diversity. We encourage, entrepreneurship, because EDHEC, was founded by entrepreneurs. So, this notion of entrepreneurship, but also having an impact, making an impact is important for us. Academic excellence, all these things are important, and we're trying to reflect, to reflect that in our scholarships. So as Sandra mentioned, our scholarships are guaranteed up until 31st of January, and they go up to 40%. So there is a Women in Leadership Scholarship, up to 40%, same for the Excellence Scholarship. And then there is a Make an Impact that goes up to 30%, and Cultural Diversity up to 20%. So these scholarships are guaranteed for everyone that applied, by 31st of January. As Sandra said, you can just go on the website, look, at the different scholarships, and know right away, there's a scholarships you will get based on your profile. But for applications, received past the 31st of January, these scholarships will be granted by special decision of the selection committee. So the names will stay the same. It's just, the percentage of discounts that may change depending on funds, available. These scholarships, they do not require an application, so there's no essay or nothing, that needs to be done. So just so you know,
Okay, thank you. Can we maybe go back to you, Aidan, and if we're thinking of the general theme of this discussion and about affordability, do you think you would have had the same career path without the EDHEC MBA?
Maybe, but certainly not as quickly, I'd say. I think I was always aspirational of moving into executive roles. I was probably missing a few key areas, but more than anything else, I'd say a program like this, like a really intense collaborative program, gives you a lot of confidence. You come out the other side with confidence in things like leading peer groups that you maybe didn't have beforehand. And I know that was the case for me, to find yourself thrust into opportunities to lead little groups of 2s and 3s, but then hosting fireside chats and speaking to big employers in a language that isn't your own. All of these things helped me come out the other end and say, I could definitely step up. So would I? Maybe, but certainly not at the accelerated rate that I was able to after coming out of EDHEC, of course.
And Aidan, is there any advice you'd like to give our guests today regarding their choice of MBA?
Yeah, I'd give you two. One is general and one is specific. The general one I've said before, but it's by far the most important. It's try to understand why you're pursuing this. Like, what are you looking to get out of this? And it's such a simple question, but it's such a difficult answer. And don't shy away from the dirty answers. Maybe I want a salary increase. That's okay. Or is it an opportunity abroad, or to come back locally, or to start my own business? There's a plethora of different reasons. But until you know what those are, or even have an inkling of what those are, the rankings and the statistics and all of the data is really, really overwhelming. there's just a lot of voices coming at you and it seems really expensive and I don't know where to look. But as soon as you're able to say, these are the things I want to get out of it, A, B, and C, then it's much easier to line those up with the offerings that each of these schools has at their disposal. So the first one is really try to get to grips with like, what am I trying to get out of this? And that's going to help you look at this with a lot more clarity. And the much more specific piece of advice I would say is try to speak to alumni, because the reality is that Nikki's going to say wonderful things about EDHEC, and they are wonderful things. But I found a lot of insight from speaking to alumni. There were one or two schools that I was interested in. I spoke to alums and they told me not to consider them. And they're going to tell it to you like it is. And I also know that EDHEC really encourages speaking to kind of current and past candidates. I would say ask those questions to those candidates. They're going to be straight and direct with you, and they're going to tell it like it is. So know what you want to get out of this, and then ask the right questions to the people who've been there. And I think if you can link those two up, you're going to put yourself in a position to make a really well-informed decision, and hopefully it ends you up in Nice.
Thank you. We are about to finish, so I'm going to remind candidates that they can ask any questions they want in the chat. We will have time for Q&A just after my last question to you, Sandra. I want to know if you have any comments or advice.
Of course I do, Nikki. So I think to wrap up, I'd say, if you're on this call, you're obviously considering an MBA. But in my experience, an MBA, and you can ask alumni, as Aidan said, I think it's a great idea. Incredible career booster, I would say, first and foremost. And I'd say particularly for international and women candidates who don't always consider MBA. So I think that that's also something you should dare to consider an MBA. It's a massive career boost. And then if you're looking for a global career, an outstanding personalized MBA experience in a diverse and experienced cohort, and you think you'd enjoy an experience of living and perhaps working in Europe, then we'd love to meet you. And you should apply to EDHEC.
Good advice. Good advice. I'm going to ask Nancy if you can maybe check the chat to see if there's any questions there. And I'm just going to throw a question at Aidan here. It might be a tricky question, but I'd like to know if you had been given a good scholarship for a higher ranked MBA, would you have chosen the other program?
Probably not, if I'm honest. And the reason is because of two things, really. The first is that the base rate at EDHEC is already extremely competitive. If it was completely unaffordable, then perhaps. But the fact that the EDHEC MBA without any scholarships is so competitive already means it's already, in my opinion, kind of head and shoulders above its comparative set. So that's the one reason. The other is that affordability really important, especially for people paying in soft currencies or paying it themselves, but it's only one. So where as I mentioned, EDHEC's probably head and shoulders above its peers in this regard, it's not the only regard. And I mentioned a couple of different considerations that I had: length of time, class profile, location of the MBA. So affordability really important, but in isolation, it's just one factor. And it was right at the top. It was one of the reasons that swayed me towards EDHEC, both its affordability and its scholarship proposals, but it wasn't the only one. And I would suggest to students considering it that it's not the only lens you look through, but it certainly is a really important one.
Thank you. Nancy, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, we received a question from Jerry Brazier, so I'm going to answer that one. So, can an individual be eligible for multiple scholarships? Yes, that can happen. But in case you are eligible for multiple scholarships, you will be granted the highest one. So, so you can only get one scholarship, and if you have to make a choice, we'll give you the highest one. So, for instance, if you're eligible for cultural diversity, but also for the Excellence Scholarship, since the Excellence Scholarship offers a higher, discount, you will get that one.
And Nancy, does EDHEC give full scholarships?
So we have the question often. So for now, a higher scholarship offers a discount of 40% maximum. So no full scholarship for now.
Are there any further questions there? Because I do have a final one for Sandra.
There was a question about how to reach out to alumni, but Sandra replied directly. So.
Okay. So Sandra, then, can you maybe tell us a bit about the careers, what the careers of the EDHEC MBA graduates look like? If you're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's kind of a broad question if I look over time, but I should say in the last 5 years, top sectors where we see MBA graduates employment would be finance, consulting, and technology firms. There's about 10% of the class every year who become entrepreneurs, who launch their business right after the MBA. Then, obviously later that can rise when it comes to alumni. We have a good career services. So 95% of graduates today are in jobs 3 months after their studies. So that's on par with the best business schools in the world. And on average, just to give you an idea, from the last salary survey, there's about, on leaving the MBA, a 70% increase from pre-MBA to post-MBA salary. Now that's on average, so I always say bear that in mind. If you go from a large multinational to becoming an entrepreneur, you will surely not increase your salary. And if you go from a large company to a small, that's often the case. If you move from a high PPP to a low PP country, that can also make a huge difference, and vice versa. So, these are averages, and you should always take those with caution and think about your own plan and what it is you want to do in terms of careers. One thing we've seen that's really exciting since we've had a strategy to reach gender equity in the class over the last 4 years, we're in our 5th year of the strategy, is that we have now seen the gender pay gap go from 16% 5 years ago to 0. Right now, women and men are earning the same coming out of the MBA. It is not the case coming in. So I think that is amazing. I hope that's a trend, but right now that's only from this year's latest data. And if an MBA can help erase the gender salary gap, hey, I think that's pretty exciting. So I hope that answers the question. If there's anything specific you want to know about careers, that's fine. But I mean, the careers of MBA graduates from EDHEC are as diverse coming out as they were coming in, and I guess if you want to know top employers, the top employers will hire 3 to 5 MBA graduates a year out of our MBA. So that's actually less than 20% of the class, right? So these would be Amazon, Amadeus, firms like Capgemini or PwC are the firms that hired the most graduates in the past 2 graduating classes, just to give you a few ideas.
Thanks for answering that, Sandra. Obviously, if anybody in the audience has other questions that they'd like answered, please don't hesitate to contact the recruitment and admissions team on mba.admissions@edhec.edu. We've run out of time, but I would like to thank you again very much for taking part today. Lots of valuable information, and I'm sure everybody appreciated it. So thank you very much. Thanks to the audience. I will say that that's the end now. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Nice to see you, Aidan.